Want to be recorded in case. Anyway, good evening and welcome to this wonderful opportunity to hear Gloria Hochman and Anndee Hochman actually interview each other. And just a little plug, Gloria and is in our family, as is Anndee, and we've always been proud of all of their accomplishments. Welcome.
I'm so lucky to have Wendy arrange all this. And I have so many of my cousins here. And we have people repeated. I'm just nice to see you all, and my brother and sister-in-law who come from Merrill.
Yeah, you might get the prize. This is not your neighborhood live-in. But for some of you it is, and some of you I haven't seen since, oh my goodness, a few years after high school, maybe. So yeah, it's really lovely to see people who span many decades in both of our lives and many corners. So I want to give due credit to the person. Well, first of all, Wendy, where did you go? There you are. A big shout out to Wendy because this was your idea. And thank you to Autumn for all the logistics on the library's end. And due credit to my daughter, Sasha, who, when I told her that this was happening, suggested the format that we should use. She said, you know, Amma, instead of like Bubby talking for 20 minutes and then you talk for 20 minutes, how about if you interview each other? After all, that's what you both do. And I said, brilliant. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to ask questions of each other. And then there will be time for all of you to lob questions of us. So do you want to start? Okay.
So Anndee, when and how did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
So it's not a surprise to anyone in this room that writing was more or less the family business. And that it won't surprise you to know that I grew up being lullabied by the tick of a manual Olivetti typewriter. That was my father's typewriter. His office was the room next to my bedroom. And that is truly how I fell asleep at night to the cadence of his typewriter.
We still have that typewriter.
Yes, I have that typewriter now. So I think I first thought of myself as a person who wrote when I got a diary at age 8. And I remember writing in it, each day's entry was in a different color of my markers. Note to folks, don't use yellow, so it's not pulled up over time. By high school, I was thinking that writing was not only something I enjoyed doing, but something I very likely wanted to do in some fashion in the future. But I think if there were many turning point moments, but one that I can pull out is that in my senior year in high school, I was neither the valedictorian nor the salutatorian. It's the person with the second highest class ranking. And the thing that disappointed me most about that was that it meant I would not get the chance to give a speech at graduation. So instead I wrote what I would have said had I had the platform to give a speech, and it was published in the Mainline Times. And
Wow.
what I took home from that was that writing could be my vehicle for saying the thing I wanted to say. And it continues to be how I make sense of the world. I was teaching second graders recently, and when I asked them why poetry matters, one second grader said, well, poetry helps you know who you are.
Wow.
And I thought, yes, that's it exactly. And that is why I write. It helps me know who I am. What about you? What did you know that you wanted to be?
Well, my husband, Stan Hoffman, many of you may know, was a sports writer. And he said that he decided he would be a writer because he didn't know how to dance. And he was at a school prom and he didn't know the steps and he couldn't keep time to the music. So he wandered down the hall to the newspaper room, opened the door and there was a teacher there. He said, "Did you come here to write?" And he said, "Yeah." And he sat down and he was writing ever since. So I realized that I became a writer because I didn't know how to dance. When I was growing up, I really wanted to be a saloonson. I wanted to be that person that would write notes at the piano. And my grandparents were the staircase broken in the middle into a platform. So I remember some of us had the staircases. So I remember standing on that platform and singing to no audience, just singing. And it really took quite a number of years before I realized I couldn't carry a tune. So did I turn to writing because I couldn't sing? In a way, I guess that's true. I had many role models that gave impetus to my desire to write. And I think that writers, I don't know if these names would be familiar to you, but do you know Nora Ephron? She's a great writer. She died much too young. And I used to read her voraciously. She wrote for the New York Post. And she would write fabulous, fabulous stories about almost everything. And then she finally wrote a book called Heartburn, which described her breakup with her husband, who was Carl Bernstein, whose name you probably do recognize from CNN. And anyway, what she said about him was that he had an affair with someone, and that's the reason their marriage broke up. And she described this woman as having a neck as long as a leg. And she said that her husband was so oversexed that he could have sex in a telephone booth on Tibet. And I thought, well, that's pretty graphic. I'd like to be able to write like that. So I think we find that in different ways. And I certainly, while Anndee fell asleep to the click-clack of Stan's typewriter, I heard that same typewriter. And I loved what he was doing and wanted to do the same thing and wanted to emulate him. And that's how I decided that I wanted to be a journalist.
You began to answer the question we came up with next, which is, but maybe there's more to say about it, about who your mentors or role models as you were developing as a writer. So yeah, other than Nora Ephron, were there people, teachers, or people you thought of as mentors who encouraged you, taught you things, and what did you know?
Not so much teachers, although there was one that I had an interesting course that he called compositions. And each student had to write a composition every week about student person that they would make up. And I remember writing about twins. And I always envisioned having a twin myself. And I decided to write about that because that could be a really interesting thing. And I think that so that was the only teacher I can remember that sort of stimulated my interest. But beyond that, I read a lot. And when I read, the people who I liked a lot, the authors I liked, became the people that were my mentors. They're the ones that encouraged me to keep doing what I was doing. I don't know how many of you know the name Pete Hamill, but Pete also wrote for the New York Post, and he became a sports writer. But before that, he was a features writer. And he used to write these wonderful features and the turn of a phrase that always thrilled me. And I had the very, very first editor that I had in New York said he was an editor of Psychology Today magazine. And he said to me, I don't care what you write about, Whether you write about food or fashion or politics or public service, always write about people. Because people want to know about other people. And I have remembered that, carried it with me throughout my writing life. And it is true, people want to know about other people. So that's the one that interests me. How about you?
Oh, so many. I mean, starting obviously at home, with the in-house role models, of both you and Dad. It wasn't only the soothing, click-clack of the typewriter, but, living models of people who showed me that, that writing was, first of all, a viable way to make a living. Not every dad grows up knowing that books and articles are written by actual human beings. And that writing was also a way to make a difference in the world. Beyond the household, there were so many teachers. My fourth grade teacher, Marlene Johnson, who one day guided us to now remember, this was the early 70s, to lie on little mats on the floor, close our eyes, visualize floating with the clouds, and then wake up and write a poem. Later, a high school English teacher, Leon Wilk, who one day, he was very tall. I was very short, some things haven't changed. One day I was in the, in the mob of students in Lower Marion High School, and he, waggled one of his very long fingers at me, come here. And I came closer and he looked down at me and said, Anndee, don't hide. And I wasn't even sure exactly what he meant, but I held on to those words and I still hold on, don't hide. As an adult, I took a very formative nonfiction writing class from a teacher named Evelyn C. White, who at the time was a writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. And one of her mantras was to ask yourself when you're writing anything, why have I invited you here? And that, part of, if you don't know that at the outset, you should certainly know that by the end. Why have I invited you here? In college, I was really fortunate to be able to take a class with John Hersey, the writer of Hiroshima, other things. It was his last semester of teaching before he retired. So it felt particularly precious to be able to do that. And one of the take homes from that class was to never forget the unspoken pact between the writer and the reader of nonfiction. The legend on the license, which is the promise to a reader of nonfiction that I, the writer, have not made this stuff up in order to create a story. I remember that. And then so many writers, like you, you find mentors in actual life, and you also find mentors in the pages. So I learned from a fellow named John Leonard, who's from the New York Times, who wrote an essay, and his style often involved starting out with 3 separate strands that would somehow braid together by the end of the essay. Structure I really admired, and this obviously back in the day before anything was digitized. So I remember going at the newspaper with scissors, clipping out John Leonard columns and keeping them in some kind of file. And then so many other writers, some of whom I've been lucky to meet, and others I've met on page, Grace Paley, the poet Naomi Shihab Nye, Joan Didion, Toni Morrison, many, many writers I continue to read and value. So, how did you get started as a professional?
I knew I got to a point where I knew I had to write. It wasn't even a question of choosing it, it's like it chose me. And I knew that if I couldn't live if I didn't write. That was what it should be. And I remember that another writer who was long more experienced than I was said to me, when you write your first paragraph, if you write the lead of your story, make sure that it is so inviting that the reader will know that he or she is being taken on a journey and that the journey will be worth it. And so I've never forgotten how important that beginning is, how that first paragraph is. And I think about that all the time. I guess the very first story I ever wrote was about women and their hairdressers. And that sounds like a pretty little subject, considering where I went after that. Much of my writing was about physical and mental health. But I used to notice that at the hairdresser, women talk to their hairdressers a lot about their personal lives, what was happening at home with their husbands or their boyfriends. And I thought, well, that would make an interesting story, and not just locally, that would make an interesting story around the country. Everybody knows the hairdresser. A lot of people do. And so I wrote a story about how women confide in their hairdressers. And I thought it was an interesting enough piece that instead of sending it to a local newspaper, I sent it to something called Newspaper Enterprise Association, which was a syndicate. And that was great that we could do that.
Were you in college then? In college?
I was out of college. No, I hadn't got to college yet.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote this piece and I sent it to the syndicate, and they loved that piece. And they loved it because they thought it was so relevant to their audiences. And that's one of the things you have to realize as a writer, that you don't write something that just interests you. Is it going to interest those folks out there? Will it interest everybody in this room? Are they going to read it? Are they going to care? So apparently a lot of people cared about that. And I ended up with a whole stack of newspaper clippings from newspapers that subscribe to this service, to the National Enterprise Association service, which was something I guess like associated with. And I thought, well, if I could do that, then that's a start. Then I grew up, got married, got to go every spring to spring training in Clearwater, Florida, with my husband. We went to watch the beginning of the baseball season. And we would stay for 6 weeks. And when I was down there, I got bored. And what was I going to do for 6 weeks? I don't even like the beach. So I decided I would look around and write about. And I learned that at that time there was a big hassle over whether rookies, first-year baseball players, would bring their wives to spring training. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds like a good story. So I interviewed wives, I interviewed players, I interviewed the manager and the coaches, and I wrote the story. The timing seemed good to me because the baseball season was about to begin. So I figured people would be interested in that. And this was a story that had not been written. So I wrote the story and sent it to an editor I had never met. He was the editor of Today magazine, Sunday magazine of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I sent it to him, and he liked the story, he ran it, and then he encouraged me to keep sending him stories, and I did. So I ended up writing for that magazine for 35 years.
Wow. How, could I, this is a good question, but like, how, that first article that you read, that you wrote about women and their hairdressers, how did they indicate, did they call you? Did you get a letter saying we loved your art, you know, your article?
I don't remember if they called me, telephones were being used more those days than they are now.
Right.
I only got an email today, maybe, but I think they probably called me. They said, we got your article, we liked your article. I mean, the only other way they could have reached me was by mail. They were working on a tighter deadline. So they said, yes, we like your article, we'd like to run it. We circulate in, I don't know how many newspapers, but it's right here, how many papers the story would run it. And
So did you do it for free until you were like?
no, I got paid Where that's
every
correct.
published.
Well, I mean, but I didn't pay a whole lot, but I did get paid for it. I paid for the piece that I did. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was a start.
Yeah,
And I was just as happy to see my byline.
for sure.
So that was how I got.
Will I answer the same question?
Please.
Okay. So, I went, those of you who know me, probably don't think of me as an especially traditional person. But my route into journalism actually followed a fairly conventional path. Starting with being an editor of our junior high school newspaper, The Gavel, at Ardmore Junior High, which doesn't exist anymore. And then continuing with the high school newspaper, the college newspaper, and beginning the summer after I graduated high school, a series of summer jobs and internships at newspapers. My first one, which was certainly in part a kind of nepotism job, was at the Philadelphia Daily News, where my father worked. And my job that first summer involved writing headlines for the letters to the editor and editing the Sydney Omar horoscope, which newspaper, through a wire service, but was always too big for the space. I probably never wielded as much power as I did in that job, deciding, which sentence of the, areas was I going to leave out? Was I going to leave it? Because some people really, base their actions and their feelings on the horoscope. So probably the most clout I've ever had. The summer after that, the summer after my fifth year in college, I worked again at the Philadelphia Daily News, this time as a nighttime copy editor, which meant working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week, which was, not great for the social life of a 19-year-old, but was a really fascinating job and something that I can say this now, it's true, it's not modesty, I was quite underqualified. I had to learn really fast. It was a steep learning curve. And I learned a lot. That was the summer that the Philadelphia Bulletin, you may remember that newspaper closed. And that would have been the summer of 1980. That would have been the summer of 1982. I worked with a bunch of, grown-ups on the night copy desk, and that was it was like booty. After that, there were summer internships at the Boston Globe, eventually one at the Washington Post. And again, if I had to pull out one moment that launched what came next, as a summer intern, typically interns weren't assigned to like high stakes stories. We were young and learning. You got to cover things like the cherry blossom parade and the weather. So one day as a summer intern, I was assigned to write about the weather in Washington, D.C. And it happened that summer of 1984, I'm sure you remember this, summer of 1984, and in particular the month of July, was an unusually cool summer for Washington, D.C. If you've ever spent the summer in Washington, D.C., cool is not an adjective that people typically use. It's miserable. And this was an unusually cool July. So that was the story assignment I landed. Go write about how July has been cool. And we had computers at the Post then, but nothing like internet. If you wanted to do research, you had to go to the library. And so I did, and I decided to find out when was the last time that Washington had a July that cool. Maybe that would be interesting. And it turned out that the last time Washington, D.C. had a July as cool as the one in 1984 was the summer Sonny Liston won the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship. It was also the summer that Blowing in the Wind was among the top 40, and there was some other fact. And so I led the article with that. The last time Washington DC had a July this cool was the year Sonny Liston won the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship. And my editor also happened to be a big sports fan, liked that lead so much that they put my weather story on page 1. I think, I did other good work at the Post that summer, but I'm pretty sure it was that story that got me noticed and resulted by the end of the summer in a sort of the next stage, which was why don't you stick around for a while, probationary basis. And then I did that for another 4 or 5 months, and then finally at the end of December, actually at the Post holiday party right before it, an editor said, okay, the probationary period has ended, the answer is yes, I'd like you to stick around. So that's.
And you can imagine how proud I was that that happened. Most of the time, I went to an internship just out of school. You don't get to stay. That's the whole thing. You have an internship and then you leave and you find a real job. So it was a major thing that they offered this job. And I must say, we're devastated when she decided to leave there. It's devastating. But it really was a very unusual thing to happen. And so Anndee, I want to ask you, why did you choose journalism? I mean, now you do many other forms of writing. But you chose journalism as your first. And is it because of what you just said, that was your entrance into professional writing, or why did you choose that?
I mean, it was certainly the path that was most visible to me. I read novels and short stories and I read poetry, but I don't think I knew anyone personally who was a novelist, a poet, short story writer until later. But in high school, what I knew when I was surrounded by journalists, broadcast folks, public relations. And so I thought, well, if I want to be a professional writer and actually make a living at this, this is the path, this is the path. I also loved and still love, because journalism is still one of the words on my email sig and on my business card. I loved writing about the real world. This complicated, beautiful, broken, messy, confusing, exasperating world that we live in. And I loved talking to folks. Writing, being a journalist is, gives you license to talk to strangers, requires that you talk to strangers. And I loved doing that. I loved finding out about people's lives. I loved the challenge of trying to render what I was observing, what I was hearing into a narrative that was coherent and engaging. All of those reasons. And what about you? Why journalism? Because actually, I mean, while you started writing, you were simultaneously starting a career in public relations.
Right. Well, I started freelancing primarily because I had a job that I did used to go to every day. And it was handling public relations first. It was for an organization called the Association for Jewish Children, which placed children in adopted and foster homes. And
it's now Jewish Family and
it's now Jewish
Services,
Family and Children's. And then I left there and went to the National Adoption Center. It wasn't called that when I went there, but it became National Adoption Center. And that was also to find families for kids whose parents couldn't take care of them for a variety of reasons. And so I had a job and I liked the job I had. So I wasn't looking for another job, but I was looking to write. So I was able to pair those two. Well, how can I write and still hold on to this job? And I realized that I could write as a freelancer. My work was accepted. It was liked by editors. I don't know if I mentioned that at the bar, I had 17 editors in the 30-some years that I wrote. And a lot of people to please. So freelancing allowed me to choose my subjects, and I learned that what I was mainly interested in were mental health and physical health. Mental health particularly, and that cut a wide swath, which I'll tell you about. But I could still keep my job, which I cherished and believed in. I believed kids should have homes, they should have families, and I was able to write about that. But my writing went in a different direction, and I found I could do both. And that's why I did that. If I had taken a job as a staff writer on a newspaper, I couldn't have kept another full-time job while I was doing that.
And I have to say, I think that also was pretty powerful modeling for me because, as you've already heard, the spoiler, I didn't stay at the Washington Post. I was there for 2 years and then had, what I sort of tongue-in-cheek refer to as a quarter life crisis. But I mean, the serious part of that was that I was fairly sure I wanted to remain being a writer, but I didn't know that I wanted to continue being a full-time staff writer at a newspaper. And when I looked closely at the lives of editors who were 10 or 15 years older than I was, I actually saw an enormous amount of stress, of unhappiness, not so many, content relationships. And I looked at their lives and thought, is that what I want 10 years from now, 15 years from now? I also was really curious to see what it would be like to live in another part of the country. I'd spent my whole life on the East Coast. So for all those reasons, and probably others, I left and moved to Portland, Oregon to become a VISTA volunteer. Which, at the time, VISTA being a domestic US-based version of the Peace Corps, a little bit different in that it was a 1-year commitment rather than 2, but the idea was similar, that you were doing advocacy within an underserved community. So, it was surprising. It's probably an understatement. Surprising to my family. Startling. But also in a way, not so surprising, because what I was doing and what I did for the next couple of years was to combine freelance writing with advocacy. I ended up working in a small social service agency in Portland, Oregon, that had begun as a free street clinic in the late 1960s. And I worked with unhoused teenagers. And, where did I get the idea that one could be a freelance writer and also be an advocate? That notion was home. So, I think I also learned from that freelancing offered variety, flexibility, things that became especially valuable once we had a child. And yeah, for all those reasons, I not only chose it, but kept choosing it. So I want to ask you, when you think back over, all the writing you did, the people you talked to, was there something you wrote about that changed your thinking or your perspective about life, about yourself, about anything?
There were a number of things that changed my perspective. One of them was a piece about repressed memory. I don't know how many of you remember the period of time when a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists were accused of talking their patients into remembering things that had happened to them that never happened. And mostly it had to do with sex that they were forced into sex by a father by an uncle, by a close friend. And the father and the close friend and the uncle swore it never happened. And the daughters and the nieces swore that it did. And I had heard about that because a friend of mine called me and said, I know you're not going to believe this, but I have a story to tell you that will really take you. So I met him and he told me that his daughter had accused him of sexually molesting him. I knew this man for a long time. I couldn't believe it. He was very gentle and I just couldn't see him doing that. Nonetheless, it was worth the story. I mean, did it happen? Who was right? Who was wrong? He said, she said. And I went into a room, a psychiatrist's office, where there were a mother, a father, a daughter, a sister. And the daughter had 2 children that she refused to allow her father to see because she thought that he would molest these children like he molested her. And the daughter is saying, yes, it happened. And the daughter is saying, yes, it happened. And the father is saying, this is ridiculous. I never touched her. It didn't happen. And I sat there not knowing what to believe, not knowing who to believe. And what I did know is that this family was damaged for life. No matter who was right, no matter who was wrong, no matter what was going to come next, this was forever damaging. And then I learned that there were many other people who felt the same way. There were many other women who were accusing men in their lives, and the men were saying no, it never happened. So I began to wonder about, is there any way to get to the truth? Maybe not. And if you don't get to the truth, whose truth is it? And if you don't get there, what happens to all of the relationships in that family? What happens to the children who will never see their grandfather? And that just sat with me for a long time because it could happen anywhere, in any family, and we would never know about it. So I researched that story. There happened to be a conference of psychiatrists in the suburbs of Philadelphia around the time I was working this story. So I would spend a couple of weeks talking to people that had gone to the conference, and I went to the conference myself. And I can't tell you the outcome, whether who believed whom. I don't know that I didn't know it at the end of the story, but I did know that it was probably the most damaging accusation that a child could make against a parent. And it stayed with me for a long time. It still gives me chills when I talk about it and I think about it. And that story ran in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was then picked up by other Sunday newspapers around the country. So that made a major impression on me. How about you, Anndee?
Stories I wrote that changed my life.
That maybe changed your thinking.
That changed my thinking. You know, again, so many. But one really pivotal project was the project that developed into my first book. That's the lavender one over there with the 2 faces on the front, Everyday Acts and Small Subversion. So the backstory of that book is I was 28 in a fairly new relationship that we both felt quite sure was the forever one, as my friend Charles likes to say, the permanent sweetheart. That I found the permanent sweetheart. And you know, I was still living in Portland, Oregon, and you know, really asking a lot of the questions that I think are not atypical for a person in their late 20s about, you know, how do I want to live and who are my people, and particularly, after coming out, questions about, what will be the life cycle markers in my life? This was well before, marriage equality was on the books anywhere. And so, thinking, okay, well, if there's not gonna be a wedding, that means there's not gonna be an engagement, there's not gonna be a proposal, maybe children, don't know. What are gonna be the turning points and who I gather for those? So I was asking all of those questions, and in the meantime, I was living with two close friends, a straight couple, who became engaged while I lived with them. And so I, had, ringside seats to everything that happened after that, including that shortly after they became engaged, their names are Rachel and John. I can say that because they're in the book. Rachel's parents bought them as an engagement present this gorgeous oak dining room table, which came to live in our house, this little rental house that we were renting for $600 a month. That was the total price. That wasn't what we were each paying. That was the total in a really nice neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. So this oak dining room table came to live with us, and I wrote a column about it for the Gay and Lesbian newspaper. Not about the table per se, but about what it meant. That symbol of permanence and and buy-in and enthusiasm from the family, and what it was like to be a lesbian watching all of that from slightly from the outside. Based on that column, a woman named Ruth Gundel, who at the time was a lapsed lawyer. She had practice as an attorney, but she had shifted careers, and she was the publisher of essentially a one-person press called the Eighth Mountain Press. Eighth Mountain because her family name was Achtenberg, which means Eighth Mountain. So she named it the Eighth Mountain Press. And she approached me after that column ran about the dining room table and said, I think there might be a book there about about non-traditional families and all the things that that women are doing and trying, and relationships remain very close with their ex-lovers, and people who form family with their colleagues, and people who are single by choice, and all kinds of parenting configurations. So we had a number of conversations that eventually resulted in a contract to write that book. And I think, you may have heard people say this. I've read interviews with writers who say, I wrote the book I needed to read. And that was very much the case with Everyday Acts. These were questions that I had, were burning questions for me. And this was an opportunity to talk to all kinds of women, mostly on East Coast, West Coast. There's not so much middle of the country represented, but women of all ages and ethnicities and family configurations about their families. And it became a quest, both a writing quest, a professional quest, and a personal quest, and has continued to change my life. One very concrete way that it changed my life is that there's a section in the book about rituals and ways that people gather and mark time. And after reading that, my good friend in Philadelphia, Hannah, said, that story in Everyday Acts about the women who get together one night a week to have dinner? We should do that. And I was like, yeah, no, she said, no, we should really do that. We should totally do that. And so we did. And in the spring of 1994, a bunch of us who were already friends decided to form what we called at the time Mount Airy Monday Night Lesbian Dinner Collective. And that meant that we got together once a week for dinner on Monday night. We rotated whose house it was, and there were 4 couples involved. And that morphed as we, there were some breakups, some divorces, some new partners in the mix, complicated. Then we started having kids. We were the first. At some point at like peak capacity, there were 8 adults and 7 children. Do I have that right? 7 children. So kind of a lot. We have continued to do that. Soup Group just marked its 30th year. So we've been eating together once a week for 3 decades. And the children now range in age from 7, my friend Hannah's youngest, River, to our daughter who's 23. So these kids were raised in Soup Group, and it was actually the subject of Sasha's college application essay. So it changed my life, it changed our kids' lives. And often when I tell people about it, people say, oh, I should do that. That's a good idea. I'm going to dinner with friends once a week. So that is something we can use. It's sprinkle with that. Is there a person you met over the years, that someone you interviewed, who has really stayed with you?
Well, I'm not sure if I can say it's a person or persons. I interviewed a man named Billy Milligan. Billy Milligan was 23 at the time, and he had 23 personalities. I did not meet Billy. I met Alan, who was one of his personalities. And it happened that Billy was a kind of a shy person. And one day he was in his home, his apartment, and there was a knock on the door, and it was police. And they came to tell him that he was under arrest because he had raped 2 co-eds on the campus of the University of Ohio. Billy stammered and said, I didn't do that. And he indeed didn't do it. One of his personalities did it. And there were 23 of them. Some of them were men, some were women, some were children. One was a lesbian. And they all knew about Billy, but Billy didn't know about any of them. So they would come out at a certain time when Billy couldn't handle the stress, or he was morphing into another line of thought. He was lost. He got on a train and went someplace. He didn't know where he was when he got there. He didn't know why he got there. And then somebody else would emerge that would take over, and that person would know exactly why they were there and exactly why they got on that train. And it was fascinating. When I went to Ohio to do the interviews, I didn't know which Billy I would be seeing, and I never saw Billy. But he was eventually acquitted, the first person ever acquitted of a major crime because of multiple personality disorder. And he died since then, but it was amazing to me to see that. And what stayed with me throughout my life is we all have mood swings. We all act differently with our mother than we do with our best friend, than we do with our child, than we do with our teacher. And how much of this is really a form of different selves that we have, different personalities that emerge for different reasons, and stay with us or don't for different reasons. And when I talked to psychiatrists about Billy, they didn't know the answer to that either, but assumed that yes, all of us exercise some capability of changing who we are, changing our personalities. In the case of Billy and other people like him, so a lot of multiples in the country, in his case, it was because of very sadistic abuse when he was very young. It's often sexual abuse by a parent. It's could be abused by a friend. It could be locked up in a closet for days. It could be taken to a place that was cave-like and set in there and forgot about for a week. It was all kinds of things, and I remember that Alan was the one that said to me, because he remembered everybody's person, that what I would do is when I was being abused, I would stare at a light bulb in the ceiling and I would focus on that light bulb because that would take my mind off what was happening to me. And I thought, how many of us are affected by different layers of who we are? And I have thought about that often when I see people in different roles. I've seen a friend who behaves one way with one person and another way with another, and indeed a totally different way with her mother. So I think that was, when you asked me the question, what I carried with me from my work, that's the one I remember most. And the story was called The Minds of Bill Milligan. I brought a copy, not to tell you this picture, but it was a very sobering experience for me. And
Want to ask you that same
I
question?
want, I'm trying to think who it might have been for you. I even asked it.
I want to guess.
Who was the person that asked you? Probably not, because I have a feeling it might have been. And I was not there, I was here. Yes, I got that, you got that.
Yeah, a person, so, you know, the person I'm thinking of, has a story, you know, nowhere near as dramatic as Billy Milligan. It's a quieter story. When I was in Portland, there was a while when, my like holy grail was to write for national magazines. That's what I should be aiming for as a freelancer. And one of the magazines I had my eye on to write for was Redbook. So I was having conversations with an editor there, pitching them lots of ideas. They rejected lots of ideas. And this was in the mid-90s, early 90s actually. And you may recall there had been a couple of incidents in that time, early 90s, of the women leaving a newborn infant in some location. Sometimes with tragic consequences, sometimes the infant was found in enough time to be, you know, cared for and rescued. And, you know, some localities established, you know, safe haven laws. If you left an infant, say a fire station or hospital, you would not be prosecuted. So an editor I was in conversation with at Redbook said, you know, we would love, you know, for you to write the story of an abandoned baby, to follow this infant, you know, the chronicle, what happened next. And I thought, okay, but you know, where is this abandoned baby to be found? And she said, well, you know, just keep your eyes open. Okay, I'll look on doorsteps, maybe I'll see one. And then a few months after having that conversation with this editor, a woman left an infant on a chair in the waiting room of a maternity ward in a Portland hospital. The baby was wrapped in a gray sweatshirt, very new. The umbilical was still, you know, on and moist. And a security camera in the elevator did capture an image of the woman who was believed to be the baby's mother, but it was very grainy. It was hard to see her, and I think she herself was kind of hidden. So there was an abandoned baby. I called the editor and said, "You're not going to believe this, but there this happened in Portland, and she said, okay, see if you can do the story. So, you know, when something like that happens, immediately Child Protective Services is activated, and so I called CPS in Portland and got permission to speak with the social worker. The baby spent a few days, she was healthy, she was full term and perfectly healthy. She spent a few days in the hospital where the nurses named her Baby Star. They adored her. I remember they put a little, you know, infant headbands on her. And then she went to stay with an extremely competent, longtime foster mom who had cared for lots of kids, including medically needy ones. This baby was not medically needy. And meantime, the police were trying to find the mom. Everyone's assumption was that the mother must be a teenager, you know, must have been terrified, desperate, without other options. Why else would you leave an infant on a chair outside a maternity ward? And so I followed that aspect of the story while visiting Baby Star in her foster home about once or twice a week for a few months. Her foster mother, so the baby's complexion and features made police and other folks involved believe that she was likely of Indian or Pakistani ancestry. And the foster mother decided to call her Kashani. She thought that sounded Indian. So I visited Kashani, and she got pretty attached to this baby. It's in a room with a very cute baby and not want to pick her up, which I did sometimes. And, you know, watched her grow over the period of 5 months. At one point actually thought we should adopt Kashani. Came home and said that, and we went so far as to start taking classes through the CPS, Child Protective Services, offered for potential foster and adoptive parents. In the meantime, police did find the mother, who was not, as thought, a terrified teenager. She was a married woman in her 30s whose husband had been physically abusive to her and to their young sons. And she was afraid that he would be even more so to her. And so in her mind, she was saving Star by leaving her outside a hospital maternity ward. You know, she was a healthy infant girl. And if you know anything about the world of adoption, there are not so many of those. And so a lot of people wanted to adopt her, including a straight couple who lived on the Oregon coast. And ultimately they did adopt her. Nishani, AKA Baby Star, AKA Jane Doe, the police terminology for her, went to live with this couple on the Oregon coast. And the social worker told me that everybody in the room, including he, cried on the day they came back. I kept Kashani's picture. I actually framed it, have it on my bookshelf, and I thought about her from time to time. With Kashani. About a year and a half ago, she messaged me on Facebook. She's 27 now, I think. Do the math. And we messaged each other on Facebook for a while, and then we had a 90-minute phone conversation. And she told me that her adoptive parents, who sound like really lovely people, had told her, I think when she was maybe 9 or 10, about the circumstances of her, her origin, her adoptions. She found my article from Redbook in a file box that her parents told her not to look in until she was younger. But she was, I think, about 15 or 16. They went out one day and she went straight to the file box. What is it they don't want me to see? And she read it and told them when they came back, and then something about it. And she, what I took from that was that, you know, a story that had, pretty broken, you know, tragic beginning, became something else, became a different kind of story. She has siblings who she feels close to. She has enormous admiration for her parents, particularly for her mother, really open relationship with them. And she has met her birth father. Her birth mother is no longer living, but she met her birth father and some of her birth siblings. And, you know, is still figuring out, because she's still in her 20s, what it means that this is her story. What it means to be an Indian, she is in fact Indian ancestry, what it means to be a young woman of Indian ancestry raised in a very, very white town on the Oregon coast, and what all of this means for her now. And it was so unexpected and so gratifying to reconnect with her after all of those years. I still have the picture on this. Wow. I want to ask you, talk to me about time. Do we have a hard stop? Should we come in for a landing?
Yeah, we officially close at 9, so the lights will come out.
Okay.
So
I don't want to hear you until.
have enough time to.
Sure.
So if you guys want to start the Q&A, that's.
So we had one thing we wanted to do before the Q&A. I want to squelch your questions, and we definitely want to leave time to sign books and give me some of that, you know, before the lights go out. But we wanted to each read you a short excerpt of a piece that we feel proud of. So.
And before we do that, I want to tell you that I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but a turning point for me in my career was when I began to look into books and what I was doing. And the very first book I wrote was on heart bypass surgery, when it was just beginning to be done. And I did a book about that. But the book that I will remember the most is the one I wrote, The Cavity. And most people remember her book's kind of Brilliant Madness. And it is about her lifelong battle with bipolar illness, then called manic depression. And this story was published first in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then a book editor contacted me and wanted to know if I would be willing to go out to California and do a book with her. I had just signed a different book contract and didn't think I'd be able to do it. I had signed a book contract on the adult children of divorce and how to affect kids as they grow up. So I went out to California. I met her in a hotel lobby. I didn't know what she would be like when I met her, what mood she would be in. Would she be manic? Would she be depressed? Would she be anything? Would she be happy to see me or not? She was. And we, it was one of those things where sometimes you meet somebody and you get along right away, you just, something clicks. And that's the way it was. I said to her, I can't start writing this book for a year because I just signed another contract. She said, I can't start for a year because I just adopted a baby. So we agreed to wait for each other, and that's what. So, you want me to read it? Or, okay, so this is a paragraph that I will read to you. The story was called A Rare Hair. The brothers Stephen and Tyler Dell have spent every second of their lives together. They go to the same schools, play the violin in tandem, and recently sang a duet, Put Your Arms Around Someone, at their school's spring hop. But the boys have never seen each other's faces, except for some sleight of hand with mirrors or computers. The boys born at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital 19 years ago are a rare set of identical twins, joined at the head, so one faces forward while the other is turned backward. When they walk down the hall at the public high school where they take morning classes, one moves ahead, the other steps in reverse. If Stephen sees someone on his left and waves, the boys pirouette so Tyler can see them also. The best thing about having a brother with whom I'm conjoined is that I always have a best friend to talk to, Tyler says. Tyler is my best friend, echoes Stephen. I wouldn't have it any other way.
And there's a photo, so when you come close, you can see. Yeah,
Andy?
yeah.
What do you want?
Sure, so, spoiler alert, Mother's Day is coming up very soon. And so I thought something that has to do with mothering. This is from a magazine that I'm so sad it doesn't exist anymore. It's called Brainchild, the magazine for thinking mothers. And it flourished for, I don't know, maybe 5 years. This has been almost entirely nonfiction pieces about all kinds of aspects of pregnancy. There was usually a funny poem in it too. And I'm so sad that this venue, didn't last. This is from a piece called Hatched. And this photo is one that I took in Zihuatanejo, Mexico. On La Avenida de los Cocos, with 100 pesos in your pocket, you can buy a tortilla press, a liter of Lala milk, several strings of dried chiles, a fringed sundress made in India, or sweet rolls and café con leche for 3. Maybe, once upon a time, the street lived its name, a dirt lane snaking between leafy fronds with hard green coconuts bunched overhead. But by the time we visited in the spring of 2006, it was a pitted road hemmed by broken sidewalks, a market yanked inside out, with people and products spilling in all directions. Pásale, pásale, buen precio, good price for you, over here. Strawberries heaped in a wheelbarrow, exhaust huffing from an idle taxi. Dead chickens dangling their necks over a tiled counter, a woman fanning them with what looked like last year's cheerleading pom-poms. Nasal honk of the Pitatlan bus, crushed marigolds, ripe avocados. Sasha twinkled her way through the chaos, a 5-year-old spark plug of energy and bravado. On our first days in Zihuatanejo, my partner and I were nervous to let her dance ahead of us like that. Then we realized we weren't likely to lose sight of her, an ivory-skinned girl in size 3 Land's End sandals, chirping "Hola" with a north of the border accent. The taffeta-skirted dress she insisted on wearing, even on an excursion to buy bottled water. And the patch, a circle of pink felt embroidered with a butterfly that slipped over her glasses and occluded her right eye. Thank you so much. We're happy to hear any questions you might have. And also there are, artifacts to look at, an actual newspaper, Sunday magazine, remember those?
This was Billy Milligan. I never liked the portrait they did of him, but I have nothing to do with that. But that was how they portrayed Bill Milligan. And this was the magazine in which the first story won bipolar in this Manic Depression. And it was called The Genius Disease, because so many people were very creative and manic depressive, including Anndee. Yes. Would you put them on the table, please?
So yeah, over there, the ones that are in multiple copies are available for sale, special Mother's Day price, and the ones of which there is only one are display copies. Those are anthologies in which I have work, either fiction or nonfiction. So
I have, before Andy continues, I have a lot of Stan's books. I wrote, after Stan died, I did a book about his career, in which I returned to what I think were his best poems. And Andy is in fact working on a book right now with Stan Press, from Temple Press, which will be out next year. So Stan's books are there. So it's really a wonderful collection of his books.
Mother's Day, although not to be gender specific. Mother's Day, Father's Day, any or all of these books would be great gifts.
Both of you written a lot in newspapers.